So good afternoon. It's afternoon in Bangkok, but I know you're all over the place. But good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to have the chance to welcome you to this discussion on unique identifiers and about how we can minimize the risk and maximize the benefits. And if your calendar looks anything like mine, this week and next week is full of exciting events on CVS in Asia and the Pacific. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join this side event today, and I hope you get to join many other events this week and next week. The conference next week is really a milestone, celebrating the halfway through the Asian Pacific CVS decade. And a unique identifier can be an important element in a well-functioning CVS system, and are increasingly important in identity management and data linkage, both within line ministries and between ministries, and in the national statistical system. The ability of individuals to prove their identity and the ability of governments to accurately identify beneficiaries is a direct or indirect enabler of many of the Sustainable Development Goals, including those related to gender equality and empowerment, access to basic health and education services, and child protection. Unicef is organizing this side event today, and we have a specific mandate to protect, respect, and uphold the rights of children and their families globally. We're also supporting many of the countries in Asia and the Pacific to strengthen their CVS systems, but also system strengthening in other sectors such as education and child protection. Unique identification numbers are used across a broad range of functional registers, but a discussion on when and how to link data, balancing privacy against the risk of not using data, and harnessing new technologies to help improve service delivery for better outcomes and improved inclusivity is often needed. And this is part of the reason we have this discussion today, and we're working on unique identifiers a little bit more broadly as well. So today, the side event aims to give you a better understanding of some of the various approaches to unique identifiers, specifically they're relevant to children, but also beyond, and also to showcase some of the benefits and risks of these approaches and recommendations. So I am super pleased with the excellent lineup of speakers today, and I really appreciate that they've taken time to help us with this side event. First off, we have Nicola Richards, who is helping Unicef as a consultant, and she will give us a good speech on the role of unique identifiers in administrative systems. We're also going to hear from Nicola a little bit later about how to design these systems. And Nicola is really a public health expert, and we're very fortunate that she's currently working with UNICEF in the Division of Data Analytics, Planning and Monitoring, where she is specifically focusing on strengthening administrative data systems. She has over 10 years experience working in the area of health information systems, including at the University of Melbourne, and, as part of the CVS, the Bloomberg Philanthropies Data. There we go. And she's also worked at the WHO regional office in Fiji and as a consultant for multiple projects. So we are super happy that she's joining us today, and I will introduce the other speakers when she has given her first presentation. So over to you, Nicola. Oh, sorry, just before I start, sorry, if anyone has any questions at any time, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we will have some significant amount of time for questions and answers after the presentations. So please feel free to put them in as we go along, so we can get to them at the end. But over to you, Nicola. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, everybody. So let me just make sure, there we go. All right, so yes, as Tanya mentioned, my name is Nicola Richards, and I'm currently working with UNICEF as a consultant. And so I'm here today to talk a little bit about the work we've been doing around unique identifiers, particularly why UNICEF is interested in this, and a little bit of background around the work that we're doing in administrative data and admin data systems, and then more specifically around around unique identifiers, some of the risks, some of the benefits. And as Tanya mentioned, I'll also talk a little bit about this guidance document that we have been developing to help try and design inclusive and safe systems that have unique identifiers based in them. So why is Unicef interested in unique identifiers? Well, it really kind of tracks back a little bit to 2017, and that was when Unicef released its Data for Children strategic framework. And this created a really important outline for how Unicef should balance its focus around the demand and supply and the use of data. And the reasoning behind the strategic framework was really that better collection, analysis, and use of data will drive better results for children. And a major focus of the strategy has been around strengthening admin data and admin data systems, and really putting children at the centre of these discussions around the admin data landscape. So from this, we've developed several new tools and guidelines. We've also been working on how to better promote and get access to existing tools that are out there. We've been looking at how to evaluate emerging issues as systems change and evolve, and trying to build in more approaches around data protection and data quality. So one of the main pieces of work that's been, I guess, driving some of this has been the Administrative Data Maturity Model, which we thankfully shortened to ADAM. So ADAM is a framework that's been used to help kind of conduct cross-sectoral assessments of the maturity of different admin data systems. And it's been really useful in trying to identify priorities for improvement over cross-cutting issues. So the strategy, and now with ADAM, they've really focused on a few different areas that have come to our attention that could be improved. So we've done a few papers already on strengthening admin data against violence against children. There's a guidance note around the use of biometrics. And then there's a few, I guess, work in progress that we could say. And so one of our work in progress is around the role of unique identifiers in admin data systems. And Tanya touched on this a little bit in her introduction. So, unique identifiers are really critical in the management of admin records, and we can see that they're becoming increasingly important in identity management and data linkage. Unicef ourselves, we use personal data across a range of activities. So we're really invested in understanding, how children are being identified, when and how data should be linked. While trying to keep in mind the balance between privacy and then the risks of not using data as well. So that was kind of a little bit of a background as to why we decided to focus a little bit on writing this guidance document and trying to get a better understanding about, well, how are identifiers being used? What are some of the best practice examples that are out there? What are some of the benefits and the risks? And so I use the terms interchangeably, but this is kind of what our working definition is. So unique identifiers, and they're often in the form of a number, a unique identification number. And it's that sequence of letters or characters, essentially, that are assigned by an organization to an individual to help identify that person, for better operations of the organization. And as we know, we really only would consider an identifier to be unique if we make sure that two people in the system don't have the same number, and also that one person doesn't have multiple identities within the system, which is what we're definitely trying to avoid here. So we've touched on this a few times already, but identifiers are really important in all admin data systems as they provide this unified means of identification across systems and over time. So they're really critical in kind of linking up a country's national data infrastructure. They're also generally the minimum requirements in the development and maintenance of admin registers, which a lot of more countries are moving more and more to get their statistics from. And they also help to avoid some of the issues that we're coming across now with using perhaps biographic or demographic information like name or sex or date of birth when identifying people, which starts to get harder at a bigger scale. And we also know that some people may have identical personal information. So at a broad level, unique identifiers can be used for the management of individuals and admin registers, and that's what we'll focus on today. But they can also be used for statistical data linkage. And they're quite different concepts, and it's generally not appropriate to reuse methods from a statistical linkage point of view in admin data systems. So just a point there to say that we're not really focused on unique identifiers in a statistical term. But thinking about it in terms of admin data systems and managing individuals, I guess on one end of the scale, we've got like our foundational, national, sometimes called global identifiers. And these are the ones that we find in civil registration and also in our national identity programs. And they create additional benefits beyond just a single sector. So it's about efficient and effective delivery of government services, increasing linkages and avoiding duplication between different registers and systems, offering more control over the quality of the content, while also reducing, the burden on individuals to have to demonstrate their identity credentials when they're interacting with government. At the next kind of level, we kind of talk about functional or sectoral identifiers, and these help individuals access certain rights and services. So if we think about healthcare or perhaps voting or education, they're really useful when foundational registers or systems perhaps don't have complete coverage, and so a functional identifier can help to ensure that all individuals can have access to a service by providing the necessary credentials. And as different sectors, need different types of data about an individual, this ability to kind of segregate identity data is something that's kind of gaining increased attention. And it's really been the case in healthcare, where a number of countries have identified risks around re-identifying patients if using a national identification number. So they've moved to have perhaps two, one specifically for health as well as a global one, and these can be linked. And then the third kind of broad category that we talk about is around kind of functional facility identifiers. So generally for paper-based systems, each facility might have its own identifier. It may or may not be linked with others. They can help with improving the continuity of services provided between different facilities. They can help with linkage over time and following a person through a service. And they can improve the confidentiality of data by removing names and other personal identifiers from records, which is good. Of course, all identity management systems require data about individuals to be collected and analysed and stored, and this does raise some risks and concerns. And I guess risks can arise at particular steps in the generation of a unique identifier, and other risks kind of are a bit more cross-cutting, and they can affect different elements. I should point out here that a lot of these risks aren't really due to unique identifiers as such. It's more that when we use an identifier, some of these risks are heightened or at a higher risk of occurring. So there's kind of a broad range of risks around the implementation level and scope. So of course, when we have a unique identifier that is used nationally and across many sectors, it can increase privacy risks, particularly if data is saved in a centralized database, which can introduce a single point of failure if the data are ever stolen or hacked. The concept of identifiers at a national level can also be met with quite strong resistance. So there's been several countries that have tried to introduce them, but have essentially had to leave it because there was quite a strong pushback. I guess conversely, though, the use of several kind of functional identifiers can generate a really fragmented approach to identity management, with overlapping and incompatible systems producing multiple identities for the same person. Having a kind of sectoral approach to identifiers can also be costly, and we can end up with lots of over-designed systems that can't talk to each other, which again, we're trying to avoid. And the expertise as well to establish and maintain these registers with unique identifiers in them might not exist if we have too much of a fragmented system, particularly if we don't have this kind of overarching framework in the country about identifiers and who's using what and how do they all link in with each other. And another kind of general risk is the one of scope creep, where perhaps personal data that has been linked through an identifier is used for new and other purposes that weren't really part of the original intent of the data collection. And unique identifiers can lead to some risks and concerns around data protection and privacy. So the potential to re-identify individuals. This is particularly the case with some identifiers that might be based on personal characteristics. For example, if it's got date of birth or sex or location embedded in it. So they can be used to isolate information at times and perhaps lead to identity theft. Another concern that we have is around the profiling of individuals and certain population subgroups that can be enhanced through the use of unique identifiers. And also this creation of digital audit trails, and particularly, you know, for children, this idea of not being in control of their own data anymore, and the right to be forgotten is one that's concerning around these. And also just general data security. So that is in terms of misuse by authorized users, but also unauthorized use of information from, say, hackers. And then there's kind of just a broad overarching level of concern just around the general operating environment, the systems and the maintenance and the management of the unique identifier itself. So for example, insecure or high-risk digital environments that many electronic systems operate in, the ad hoc nature of a lot of administrative information systems using unique identifiers that might have unclear perhaps roles and responsibilities, or not defined processes around what's being collected, what's being shared, and of course inadequate legal frameworks around the supporting and the regulation of identity management systems can all lead to privacy and security concerns. And as mentioned, so for us at Unicef, the use of unique identifiers does pose specific risks for children. So we're particularly concerned about exclusion from services and rights and entitlements, with the formalization of identity systems that unique identifiers can bring with them. It can potentially increase the risk of exclusion, and maybe marginalized groups, or perhaps children in displaced situations that might not want to be formally recognized by the government. How can we make sure that they're still able to access services if they don't have these specific types of identity credentials that are needed? Identity theft and fraud has been mentioned, but identity personal data is increasingly being targeted by thieves, and child data is particularly vulnerable because children often don't understand what data is being collected about them and how it's being used. And there are also just some, general risks around privacy violations, targeting based on personal characteristics. And again, this concept of the loss of agency over the use of personal data that may happen to children, and the loss of the ability to remove perhaps incorrect data or have it modified. So very, very quickly, that's kind of a bit of a background into what some of the key points have been that we have found in it. I'm going to flick back now to Tanya, who's going to introduce our country speakers, and then I'll quickly come back at the end to talk a little bit more about the guidance document that we've been developing. So if I...
Thank you so much, Nicola. And I think that was a really good introduction to the issue, and also some of the risk, but of course also a lot of benefits associated with unique identifiers. And I'm sure we'll hear more about the benefits from our country presentations. And I'm super pleased that we have a very nice lineup here of colleagues from the Maldives, Armenia, and the Republic of Korea. And I would like to start off with our friend from the Maldives, Hassan Nasheed. He's has worked at the National Registration of Maldives since 2012, mainly focusing on data processing, in particular as this relates to the national identity card. And he basically ensures that every newborn get a national identity number and that its information becomes part of the system. He's also been involved in the broader CLVS team to develop and improve CLVS in the National Registration Department in the Maldives. And he will be presenting on the use of unique identifiers in Maldives. So thank you so much for joining, Hassan, and really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Good afternoon all. I will going to share my presentation.
Yeah, it came up and then it disappeared again. Okay, yes. We just need you to go to the presentation.
Yeah.
Although I do like this website a lot. Great. Thank you so much, Hassan. Over to you.
Yeah. I'm going to present how we in Maldives we use as a unique identifier as a unique identifier in Maldives. We use every Maldivian gets a unique identifier number for every Maldivian. It consists of alphabet starting with A followed by 6 numeric number like A0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. We gave the number for all Maldivians. And it is a sequential number, but that number does not contain any information about the person. It is a sequential number that does not contain any information now. And we have raised the issues of the current system because this ID number is a sequential number that can be given by every Maldivian, and the number can be guessed and vulnerable to identity to fraud. It can used as a fraud. The number can be used to make the fraud also, and it has a risk of duplication because from the several ministries they use the like license and ID number, like same they give as a license also. Same like followed by A, then they will numerical numbers like identity number. And it has a burden to memorize the similar but not identical numbers. And it is impractical to provide different identification numbers from government organization. Like I said before, the driving license and identity card has a same numbers like that. Then we propose solution. We go through like informative national identity number, including introducing and making it only unique identification number that the government Maldives provide the Maldivians. So like that. So as a license number also, we propose that use as a same number that we are giving to the person as an identity number. We request them to use the same identity number, but as usual, as now they are using separate number for license also. And go to why do we need informative national identity number? Can be provided immediately after the birth of the child as in the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Children, and does not require a birth certificate to enter into the database. And it is convenient and easier to use and memorize when it is in unique format. And it has interconnectivity with all the government offices. And strengthens the proposed system. To strengthen the proposed system, we found that when we strengthen the proposed system, it reduces the risk of identity fraud, cannot be guessed, no duplicate entries, less time to consume in and obtain required information. And it has decreased the possibility of change in information due to change in permanent address. As in Maldives, it is very easy to change the information like permanent address. Very rare it will change in Maldives. And it leads to better centralized civil registration database. As we make the civil register base a central database, so it can strengthen the data. informative ID numbers, we suggest that these information can be included in the national ID, date of birth, place of birth, sex, sequential number. That's the number and the check digit. These are the information that we collect now to make the ID unique identifier number. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hassan. It was very, very interesting to hear about, some of the challenges you're facing with the current system and how you're looking at a unique identifier across systems to solve some of those issues. And yeah, I can see that one of the arguments is about interoperability, which is obviously something that we will also look at a bit more with some of the other presentations. So thank you so much, and I'm sure there'll be many questions to you when we get there. Thank you. And our next presenter is from Armenia. This is Annie Mkhitaryan, and she's advisor to the Minister of Justice in Armenia and the Prime Minister, and also head of the Civil Status Acts Registration Agency.
She was the head of.
She was the head.
She was.
So she coordinated the work of the Civil Status Act Registration Armenia, and she's really been instrumental in significant improvements to the system since she joined the agency in 2014. And a lot of what I've been seeing from far away is that she's made a lot of efforts to make registration easier for the population and also for digitization of the system. And it's been really interesting to follow this.
Oh, thank you, Tanya.
But also, in addition to doing all these great things back home, you've also played a really important role at the regional level, because she's been an excellent vice chair of the regional steering group for CIVS and Asia Pacific. And she's been giving great support to the Get Everyone in the Picture initiative for many years. So I'm very pleased to present to you, Annie, on using unique identifiers in civil registration in Armenia. Over to you, Annie.
Thank you, Tanya. So first of all, let me to express my deep gratitude to you for organizing this site, even because it's really very important, time by time to share some information or achievements in this field with our colleagues from other countries. Thank you. So today, the introduction.
Your camera.
Oh, there is some problem when I turn on the camera. I cannot hear, or there is some problem, no technical problem with voice.
No worries. We have to concentrate on your voice then.
Yeah. Today, the introduction and improvement of the CRDS and legal identity systems are one of the priority objectives of the government of Armenia, as well as in the whole world. And I would like to highlight again and again that all our achievements in this field, what we have today, is certainly the result of demonstrated will and continually implemented policy of my government to develop and expand the e-governance system. Our system today is very original, very flexible, very safe, and electronic base for connecting numerous state bodies and their function to provide a wide variety of services to the Armenian citizens, and sure not only for our citizens. Just a short background to understand how we did it. From 2008, with the financial support from the state budget and international development partners, of course, such as the EU, UN, and the World Bank, the government was able to implement numerous of projects. The first and the main project was the unique ID system development, which was introduced as a mandatory form of personal data in 2013. And due to this system, each citizen in my country was given a unique identification number. And moreover, every person who is in Armenia on a legal basis, I mean for work, for study, who is registered in the population register, is also granted an ID. Because in Armenia, no public services are provided without a public services number, which is an ID, I mean acting as an ID. For identity management and for operating the population register is responsible our police. They issue identification number for public services, national identity cards, passports, and driver license. I mean, the documents that are officially recognized as identification credentials and proof of identity. Developing the electronic population register and national identity card was also a very wonderful opportunity to digitize the identity management process. And on the basis and around of the unified ID system, several electronic systems were constructed and currently function predominantly on the Armenian ID number of a person. And one of these electronic systems has been the Civil Status Acts Registration Unified Electronic Management System, which was fully implemented in September 2014. And now we have a fully digitized Civil Status Acts Registration System, which conducted online with the Population Register, the social services, the National Statistical Service, Armenian consulates abroad, and with more than 315 hospitals and many bodies and organizations by law. And I would like to explain or present how we use the ID system in the civil registration on an example of birth or death registration. So as I told, any citizen of Armenia can use public services if he has an identification number for public services, which acts as an identification number. Civil registration is the most demanded public service as everywhere. And due to the interoperability of civil registration and population register systems, in 2017, the Ministry of Justice designed and implemented a unified electronic database of medical certificates of birth and death and prenatal mortality, of course. Since 2017, all medical birth and death certificates in Armenia are registered in the electronic format. All information about our citizens in the medical certificate is generated from the population register automatically. After medical registration, the certificates are visible in Civil Status Acts registration system. And when in the territorial body, we accept an application for registration, death, birth, or prenatal mortality in Civil Status Register, all personal information about parents, child, or died person are filled by the system automatically based on the both of population register and medical certificates. Each child whose birth is registering in Armenia is issued with an ID public service number. And in order to obtain the child's ID number, parents do not have to visit the police territorial body. When we register a child birth, the system automatically sends a request to the population register and automatically receives an ID for the child. From May this year, we also fill the ID number of child in his birth certificate. So what kind of benefits does it give to parents and to child? Firstly, parents apply for childbirth allowance to social welfare immediately after registering the child's birth through the electronic system of civil registration, which is connected with the electronic system of social welfare services. Parents just choose the bank to receive the cash. As I mentioned, for using the medical services, education services, the child has to have ID number. And when we give it, starting from his birth, we provide all children's rights. I think so. I hope. And we hope for him, we open for him all doors of public services. And the same procedures we use for the funeral expenses during the death registration. And all information about the death registration of our citizens automatically sending to the population register. And after receiving death registration information, that person is removed from the register of the place of residence and removed from the electoral list. Due to interoperability with the National Statistics Service system, each birth, death, and prenatal mortality registration automatically sent to them without paper copies. Of course, this kind of systems interoperate connecting of these systems makes our life really very easy. The interagency cooperation of the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Healthcare, and the National Statistical Service has clearly formed in the country and continues to develop. Also, we already have formed an effectively operating CRVS and national identity management system. We intend to continuously enhance them and bring them into compliance with the modern condition. Truly sustainable CRVS and legal identity system are necessary for all goals that are predetermined in the SDG and aim at ruling out poverty and improving the quality of life in the whole world. Due to the effective activities of this very system, we will be able to have a real assessment on the successful achievement of the SDG goals. I mean, the point of 16.9 of the Agenda 2030. And I would like to say finally that Armenia, me, myself, we are always ready and open to exchange our practices in improving the CRVS and national ID management. We will be very happy to give any information we have for these days. I think that's all for today, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Annie. And I have to admit that it was almost kind of nice not having slides and really having to focus on what you were saying, because you said a lot of really interesting and exciting things. I mean, it's obvious that there's been huge changes in the system over the last 10 or so years, and I know that you've been really instrumental in those changes. And I also really appreciate, it's an ongoing development, it's an ongoing process, and you continuously take further steps forward. And I also really appreciated your giving a broader perspective on how this really changes development outcomes longer term as well. So thank you so much. And I'm sure there'll be questions to this presentation as well. But before we get to our questions and answers, we will have our last presenter from a country, which is from Korea, Hyun-Jung Song, who is the Deputy Director of the Vital Statistics Division at KOSTAT, the Korean Statistics Institute. And she'll be presenting on how the resident registration system is used for e-government and statistical production in Korea. Ms. Song graduated from Seoul University, Seoul National University, sorry, in 2017, so not that long ago, and she's obviously made a very quick and important career in the KOSTAT. I think the Korean system is definitely one of the more advanced in Asia and the Pacific, so I'm super pleased that we get the chance to learn more about it. So thank you very much for joining, and I look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
I share my presentation. Can you see? Okay.
Yes, we can see. We just need to put it in. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hyun-Jung Song, working at the Vital Statistics Division at KOSTAT, also known as Statistics Korea. And thank you for organizing this side event, and it's with my great honor that I take part in this event. I present Korea's resident registration system and its usages in our e-government and statistical production. Even though I'm not very proficient in English, but I will do my best. The presentation will cover 3 topics. First, utilizing the resident registration for e-government services. Second, utilizing the resident registration for statistical production. And conclusion. I will begin with the concept of the resident registration system in Korea. The resident registration system in Korea refers to a system in which information on residents and their addresses is recorded and managed by the government according to a purview of jurisdiction. In other words, The resident registration system in Korea is the equivalent with CR, civil registration. Korea adopted the resident registration system to provide information for the efficiency in public administration and improvement of people's quality of life. Anyone filing their birth in Korea will be registered as a resident and be issued a 13-digit unique personal identification number. It's the national unique identification number, known as resident registration number. It's too long, so sometimes I will call this RRN. The first 6 digits represents the date of birth, and the 7th digit represents the person's gender. Using my own case as an example, my resident registration number begins with 9203, which means I was born in 1992 in March, and the second part of the number begins with 2, which means I'm a woman. At the age of 17, people will have a resident registration card by the government, which can be used as an ID card. Next, let's look at major milestones in the history of the resident registration system. Our resident registration system has evolved to reflect social changes and needs of the people. An important evolution is a transition from a paper system into an information system. With this nationwide information system, civil affairs, including resident registration, can be handled outside one's residential district. The Korean government makes use of this information-based system, resident registration, in providing police services known as e-government services. E-government services allow people to access and use a variety of civil services anywhere and anytime through the internet and mobile network. The kind of civil services available online include the filing of address changes, the issuance of resident registration documents, and more. Government 24 is the name of the integrated government service portal operated by the Korean government. This portal is based on the resident registration system through which a variety of civil services can be handled. The highlight of its services is the online delivery of civil services. Users of the portal can request the issuance of civil documentation and print these documents on their own PCs or mobile devices without having visit government offices. This slide shows you the main web page of the Government 24 in Korea. Using resident registration certificates, users can have their certificates issued online. And I'd like to point this. This is vaccine certificates, including COVID-19. And the second topic of my presentation is the use of resident registration for statistical production. The prime example is the production of vital statistics. And I'd like to briefly explain our vital statistics production system. The vital statistics are produced for explicating the state of birth, deaths, marriages, and divorces in Korea, which cause changes in the size and structure of population. The targets and events of vital statistics are same as those of the family relationship registration, so survey operation and data production for vital statistics have been performed in connection with the family registration system. Korea established this linkage between vital statistics and family relationship registration in 1970. And their information systems have been linked since 2004 to increase efficiency in the production of vital statistics. It's not that simple, so let me use a diagram for illustrating the structural flow of producing vital statistics. Taking a birth case as an example, when the baby is born, the parent or guardian of a child files the birth to a city or county, and then the file is recorded in the resident registration system, which will assign the newborn baby a resident registration number, identification number. At the same time, the family relationship registration reflects the addition of the child in their family relationship, and this update in the family relationship is reflected to the vital statistics survey system, and because they are linked together and costed by utilizing data collected through this system produces the vital statistics. Now, on another spectrum, the resident registration numbers are used for data linking. Different sets of administrative data can be linked with one another as long as they have the information of the resident registration number in common, and the resident registration numbers can be used as a linkage key. However, for the purpose of protecting personal information, the resident registration numbers have to be replaced internal alternative numbers. I will talk about this later. And now let me introduce two cases of data linkage performed by COSTED. The first case is the population and vital cohort database. We compiled 4 distinctive databases in births, deaths, marriages, and divorces, and connected them on the base of the birth information last year. And we plan on launching this cohort data service at the end of this year. This cohort database allows a life cycle analysis in each birth cohort. The second case of data linkage is the statistical registers. A statistical register is a set of data for a given population in which COSTED survey data and other institutions' administrative data are combined. A unit of the populations can be individuals or establishments. And this slide presents the overall architecture of statistical registers. COSTED currently have basic registers about population, household, housing, and so on. And we are striving to build an integrated statistical register by combining existing basic registers with other data. And we are striving to get this data. Even more important than data linkage is the protection of personal information. A resident registration number is sensitive personal information containing unique identification, so it is important to encrypt and replace it. It's not simple, so I'll keep later. And now let me summarize our experiences by sharing some insights with you. The resident registration system provides a foundation for the transformation into an e-government, and the electronic system has enhanced efficiency in public administration, saved time and costs, and brought more convenience into the daily lives of people. Of course, such convenience has to be in balance with the protection of personal information. Data linkages among administrative data using the resident registration numbers enables more accurate and timely data production. However, the protection of data across the entire process has to be guaranteed with the use of data protection measures, such as de-identification or encryption. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I could see that your presentation sparked a lot of interest. There were multiple questions popping up through your presentation. Also, of course, thank you very much for reminding me of how old I am, putting your birthday up there. And no, that was really, really interesting. And I really appreciate you showing, the use for e-government and how much easier it makes for individuals to use government services. You also pointed at really important points about data protection and privacy. And I think some of the questions that have popped up is also related to that. So thank you so much. I mean, as I said in my introduction to you, I think Korea is really far ahead with the system you have. So it's really nice to learn a little bit more about it. So before we go completely into questions and answers, Nicola has a few more things to say about the construction of unique identification numbers and how to implement them. And I just wanted to highlight, there was a question in the chat about whether Unicef is kind of against numbers that are highlighting birthday and location and these kind of things. And I think it's not necessarily that, it's not necessarily that we're against it. I think in the past, and many of the great systems that are using unique identifiers are really based around birthdays and gender, sex in the unique identification number. But I think we are at a stage now where we can probably construct numbers that are less easy to identify individuals from. And I think Unicef would recommend that is the future, but of course, all of these great systems that are based on these numbers, it's not that we would recommend that they are changed. So over to you, Nicola, to give a little bit more insights on how to actually do this. I can see that some of the participants here are in countries that do not currently have unique identifiers, so I'm sure they're keen on hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and yes, I'll try to address some of the questions that I saw pop up on the chat as well. So it was quite interesting when we started to talk about developing this guidance. It was one of the things where we thought there'd be a lot of information out there, but there's actually very little in terms of guidance. Even I saw one of the questions around, best practice or case studies for migrants or people on the move. Essentially, no, or at least nothing that I've been able to find so far. So if anyone knows of anything good here, this would be a fantastic platform to share. We were quite surprised at how little has been written about unique identifiers. Not sure, perhaps because they've been embedded in other systems, or we just assumed that the guidance has been written somewhere else. So essentially, we thought this guidance document would just be an internal document for Unicef staff, but we're thinking that it'll probably be something that will be available a bit more broadly, just given the lack of guidance out there. So what we've started to put together is a bit of a framework to help well, for now, it's to help UNICEF country office and regional staff when working with government counterparts, but of course, anyone can use the document. And we've kind of split it into 3 different sections to help just some practical approaches. Of course, you know, this is all going to be heavily dependent on implementation context and where you're implementing and what type of unique identifier. So while I might say things here might be best practice or seeming to be best practice, like with most complicated things, there's no right or wrong, yes or no to any of these. So essentially around planning and preparation, you know, some time limited and one-off steps that kind of need to be done as part of planning and preparation for a unique identifier. And while these don't have to be carried out in any specific order, when we've looked at countries that have got good systems and things that are working well, they've kind of all made sure that they've touched on most of these points. So, you know, who is going to lead and champion the work? What's the mechanism going to be for coordination and oversight? One of the questions I saw pop up on the chat was, you know, how do we make sure that everyone's using the same identifier? And of course, that all comes back to talking to the other agencies that, you know, we all want to be using the same one. Part of that is, you know, what's already out there, what systems are using unique identifiers, or perhaps not fully unique, but who's using identifiers? How are people already being identified in these different systems and sectors, and what are the gaps? You know, do we need this new unique identifier? What role is it going to fill? You know, so trying to be as specific as possible about what will it do. That's also important in terms of trying to limit things like scope creep, keeping roles and responsibilities really clear, keeping the amount of data being collected, you know, really defined, reviewing the legislative framework. You know, there are a few countries out there that are quite specific and explicitly say, you cannot have a unique identifier. In New Zealand and Australia, where I'm from and where I live, you know, there's legislation that says no, that you're not allowed to do it. So of course, making sure that any proposed identifiers don't go against any legislation is pretty important as well. And thinking about the maturity of the supporting digital infrastructure, and I'll touch on this in a little bit, but you know, we might have some of the best practice, or you know, we always want to have a perfect system, but if we want to generate a randomly generated number, you know, that needs to be connected to the internet, can that be done at a local facility, perhaps in a rural or remote village? You know, so what are the implementation kind of realities that might mean that we can't implement a gold standard system, but what might the next best one look like? And who's going to be in charge of it? There was a question, I think, on the chat about, you know, how are they managed? And from what we've seen and what the countries, and I'm sure other people in the chat, you know, can share, there is no one right way of doing this. In some countries, it's, you know, the unique identifier is generated through civil registration at birth, and other ones it's through national ID, and then they're linked back. So, you know, there's no one right way. The key thing is that there's just clear roles and responsibility, clear data flow, clear procedures, all of those things that we kind of know and understand, but can sometimes get a little bit pushed aside when we start to talk about some of these larger issues. So that's kind of the first part of the guidance. It's some of the background, some of the planning. The second part is looking more at kind of the technical nuts and bolts. You know, what does a unique identifier look like? And so we've got a series of kind of questions with some links to other documents around, you know, what makes a good identifier? And a lot of that has to do with how it's going to be used and what kind of scope it's going to have. You know, are we talking about a national global identifier that will be used across sectors, or are we talking about something that's just confined to perhaps within healthcare, or something that's maybe even just within one hospital? So a lot of the existing information out there has come from health and healthcare, which is good, but I think that also shows, you know, where we've got some gaps in the evidence and literature around, you know, well, what's different perhaps for civil registration or a national ID system, and there's certainly not very much out there at the moment to help with some of these. One of the questions, again, you know, how should it be structured? And so we've talked a little bit about this, and we've seen the examples there of identifiers based on kind of coded personal information, which, as Tanya mentioned, you know, some of the countries with the most established histories of unique identifiers, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, you know, they have this coded information in it. What we're seeing though is that, yes, best practice is recommending now that where possible and if you can to have randomly generated numbers. It helps with making sure that you're going to have enough numbers to continue into the future with population growth, but it also just helps to, you know, just protect data and stop it from being potentially re-identified with the person. You know, a conversation around how many digits does our identifier need to have. There have been a few countries that have had to modify their existing identifier when they've run out of numbers or they've realized that they might be starting to run out soon. There are a few documents that can help people through, you know, these types of discussions, looking at population growth and how many numbers are we going to need now in 10, 50, 20, 100 years into the future. We don't touch on it too much in this document because it's quite a big topic and there are some other guidance notes out there, but, you know, should biometrics be included with a unique identifier? And I guess our note here is that, you know, while they can be useful, they're not necessary, you know, they can be done separately. So some questions around planning for that part of it. And then the third part of the guidance is starting again to look at some of the actions and kind of broad conditions that need to be in place when we're working towards implementation. So establishing and maintaining the registry, you know, who is going to do that? This is when a lot of the conversations around, I love this word, interoperability, have to come into place, but, you know, to make sure all of the things around data standards and metadata and making sure that we're using the same standards and terminology so that we can share our data with each other, you know, the background conversations that can make or break some of these systems, strengthening the legislative framework, making sure that we've got these policies and procedures in place, you know, and making sure that we also can enforce any changes to legislation or changes to regulation. Talking about protection and privacy by design, and that was mentioned in the presentation from Korea, and a lot of other countries as well are starting to look at, you know, how can we use technological advances like tokenization and encryption and these sorts of things to really make sure that the data is safe when it's being stored, but particularly when it's being shared between different agencies and systems. Planning for sustainability, you know, do we have the people power? Do we have the money to do this if we are implementing a system, you know, to make sure that it will be properly supported for many years to come? And I should say a condition with that as well is also planning to, you know, look at what systems might be impacted if we're proposing a new identifier or something that's perhaps different to what is already in place. You know, how can we make sure that existing systems are either migrated or decommissioned so that we don't cause more harm by just coming in with another system and interrupting what's already there. And part of that is around community engagement and communication, but also communication with other agencies. So as mentioned, you know, who's going to be part of this bigger system, who needs to use the identifier. So from a government perspective, making sure that we've got everyone together in the same room, but then also from a community level, how do people feel about using, you know, an identifier? In some countries, it might not be a big issue, and in others, it could be. So, you know, having those conversations as well. So essentially, that's kind of the start of this framework that we've put together. We hope it will be a kind of useful, practical document to help work through some of these kind of questions. And I can see there's probably a few more in the chat as well that we might think about, you know, how we can address some of these things. And as mentioned, no right or wrong, but simply just trying to put together some examples around what's being done in the past, what are countries doing now, what's working, and what are some of the conditions, you know, that really help with success for unique identifiers. So on that, I'll throw it back to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Nicola, and it's really wonderful to see the discussion happening in the chat box as well. I really appreciate you highlighting the issue of trust, and also you know, that there are many ways of doing this, and each country has to find the best way, but we are seeing, you know, some evidence of certain systems being better. And one of the points that I picked up from the chat was about whether health systems need to allow patients to take treatment without a unique number. And I think this is one of the key points for UNICEF engagement is that we don't want the absence of birth registration or the absence of having a unique identifier or a national ID card to be restricting services. It's important that all children can access education, whether or not the birth are registered, and accessing healthcare, whether or not you have a unique ID number. Or so I think that the point about inclusive systems. So first of all, trying to ensure that everyone is in the system, but also that if you are not in the system, you should still be able to access essential services is really key. So thank you for highlighting that point in the chat box. There were a few other questions that came up that I would like to kind of throw back at our excellent speakers. And one of them was from Kamini Naidu, who was actually the chair of the regional steering group for CIVS Nation, the Pacific, and it's very nice to see you joining, Kamini. And your question was about the role of unique identifiers versus, identifiers across various functional registers and systems across. So I would like to ask our colleagues from particularly Korea and Armenia about whether these unique identifiers are now used across all systems, or whether you still have multiple other identifiers used in different administrative systems. It also links quite a lot to what you both mentioned about interoperability and service delivery and ease of service for residents. So I think I would start off with asking you, Annie, if it's okay to put you on the spot, how you see the role of unique identifiers versus other identifiers in Armenia.
So Tanya, as I told, only our police give the ID numbers to our citizens and other person who is live on a legal basis. And this ID number is absolutely visible to all our state bodies, who give some public services, and due to interoperability of the systems. And may I ask you to repeat your question?
Yes, of course. I was just wondering that now you have the unique identifier. Do you still have? Is that unique identifier used across all government systems, or do you still have other identifiers in different systems? So basically, how broadly is this used, and do you see how do you see developing?
No. We use just one identifier numbers for public services. It's called ID number for public services, and it's used for all bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to also talk a little bit about this.
Yes. Like Armenia, in Korea, also use only one identification number, IZRRN, but sometimes we use driver's license number, passport number, but in the policy services from government, we use only the RRN as a unique identification number.
Thank you so much. Another question. So I was seeing in the chat box, and also I must admit I have been looking at who's joining as participants. And I know we have some significant expertise here about the system in Ireland, and also the systems in Denmark, the system in Denmark. I don't know if any of you, I'm thinking of you, Celia and Charlotte and Steve, if any of you would like to take the floor, putting you on the spot a little bit here.
Hi, Tanya, this is Steve.
Hi,
yeah,
Steve.
the papers I put in are really, they were written, well, the first paper was written really as an open letter to the Irish government. So when I worked in the statistics office, we were trying to convince them to introduce a unique identifier. In fact, we were trying to convince them to introduce 3 unique identifiers: a person identifier, a place identifier, and a business identifier. And the difficulty we were having is the government didn't really understand the benefits or why you would do it. So the first paper was really, that's why I said it's really about the why. The second paper was written after I joined the UN. My first mission was to India. And at a regional workshop, I was demonstrating the use of linking administrative data in the tourism sector. And basically the reaction was very interesting, having come from Europe, I guess, because a lot of countries were unable to link administrative data sets. So the second paper was really written to try and generalize the idea and put it in the context of SDGs, to again show why this is important, but also to also discuss a lot of the issues that Nicola very nicely presented around the trade-offs, the kind of the risks around identification. You know, so none of this is straightforward. So they're just 2 background papers that might be of use to somebody who's really interesting at the start of the journey, just trying to understand why you might do this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dave. And yeah, I think you also raised a really relevant point. I think Nicola mentioned as well that, you know, in some countries there may not be an appetite for having these things, and then in other countries it's kind of who we are a little bit. So I think Celia put the camera on, and I think you'll be very good to speak about the Danish system, where it's really a big part of your identity having this national identity number.
Yes, and I completely agree with you. I just wanted to say, because we get asked by a lot of systems, I'm a consultant with UNSD at the moment and work with a number of countries that are very interested in hearing more about this. And I think one thing that we realize is that trust, or like the whole cultural thing, is a big part of it. And that's something that doesn't just come overnight. So even though you work on setting up those systems, there also needs to be a lot of work making the population comfortable with this kind of concept, and getting everybody involved, that the ministries trust each other and those kinds of things. And just to advertise a little bit, we're working on a micro-learning with all the Nordic countries together to present to have a brief introduction of how it's built up with the three core registers and then everything that's linked to it. I don't know when it's going to be finished, but I hope soon.
Thank you so much, Celia. Nice to hear, nice to see you as well. Okay, so just wondering if there's any of the questions in the chat that we haven't addressed yet. There was some very interesting discussions on, you know, migrants numbers and using across different countries, but I think there was some guidance given in the chat box already. Anything else? But maybe we could actually address this issue of trust a little bit. I don't know if that would be okay. If I could ask you, Annie, to put you on the spot a little bit. Oh, sorry, I see a hand. Okay, let us take the hand. That was Vicky Bennett. I'll give you the floor.
Hello, thank you. Look, one of the roles that I play is as a WHO advisor to the Pacific Health Information Network. Excuse me, but I'm from Australia, and hi Nicola, because we've worked together before. And we had a workshop actually on this topic in the Pacific a number of years ago, well, about 3 years ago, that SPC facilitated, and it was held largely with those who manage vital statistics, but we tried to bring the health sector along and have an overlap meeting, because I think that's a really important cross-sector intersection, I guess. You know, we birth people, we help people die gracefully in the health sector, but the Statistical Bureau of Statistics often are managing these things. And I think one of the the realizations is the importance of bringing those two sectors together for this. You know, and I guess one of the sort of conversations meeting was the very significant overlap, but not complete overlap. You know, it's a bit of a Venn diagram, because the health service offers services to people who aren't necessarily citizens, and especially with migrant workforces, and people have raised those issues. It's really important that those things are considered. People have talked about refugees, but it's not just refugees, it's migrant workers. You know, in many countries, people are very highly mobile. And I guess nothing has highlighted this more than COVID. And one of the challenges we're struggling with in the Pacific is unique identification of people for COVID vaccination certificates, because to be allowed to come into Australia or New Zealand to work, they have to be vaccinated. But that unique identification is becoming one of those big issues. And I guess, you know, no one wants to talk about the elephant in the room, but COVID is making this like #1 priority in lots of ways for countries where they do have a lot of migrational issues. So I think in a way it gives us a burning platform to start to address some of these issues. And I just encourage you and thank you for doing some of the work in this area. I'm really looking forward to reading more about what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Vicky, and also thank you for highlighting the issue of, you know, the relevance to COVID. I also saw that Kamni mentioned that in Fiji, the unique identifiers that are issued by the birth registry was used as an identifier for online COVID-19 vaccine registration. And I know that in a number of countries in Asia and the Pacific, the vaccines has been linked and used. Given on the basis of national identification documents, and unique identifiers obviously play a key role in these. There is some really interesting questions from Guminda regarding, you know, access to services if you do not have the national, if there's a unique identity number and you don't have that. And I don't know if our colleagues from Korea or Armenia, or maybe even from Denmark, want to address that, how we ensure access to services for individuals who do not possess these numbers. Or the flip side of that, how we ensure that everyone have these numbers. I don't know if I could ask any of you to talk to that point. No one is volunteering. Okay, I can say a little bit though that I mean, if we go beyond unique identifiers and look at civil registration and biostatistics more broadly, obviously the need for everyone to be included and everyone to be in the picture is something that is really key, and especially for you know, the whole leave no one behind agenda and so on. ESCAP is doing some work on trying to identify who is left behind, and doing assessments of you know, the people who are not registered. As part of the regional action framework for civil registration and biostatistics in Asia and the Pacific, countries have actually signed up to doing inequality assessments of their CVS systems. But doing the evaluation of the CVS decade halfway through the decade, is obvious that that is one of the things that many countries haven't been able to do so far. So ESCAP has started doing some work in this area, trying to support countries in assessing who is left out. And of course, the more service delivery is linked to legal identity and documentation of legal identity, the more important it becomes that everyone has that legal identity. I mean, as you might have guessed, I'm also Danish, and I think in Denmark it would be very, very difficult to access most things if you don't have a unique identifier, whereas in other countries where it's not that common and where the registration rates are much lower, it's not such a barrier. So I think this is a really important point. And thank you, Steve, for asking about the UNICEF document that Nicola is working on. It's still a work in progress. It's going through multiple reviews, so we cannot share it just yet, but Nicola is doing an excellent job in trying to pull together all the evidence that's already out there, including your papers that you mentioned there, and also some of the other work that's been mentioned in the chat, and also interviewing a lot of the key players in this area, and trying to get, you know, some really good people to review these as well, so that we can come up with something that is really usable, not just within UNICEF, but also beyond. Okay, does anyone have any burning questions? Because otherwise, I think we will finish a few minutes early so everyone can grab a coffee before the next meeting, assuming everyone is busy these days. Thank you so much, everyone, for your excellent contributions and questions. It's obviously an issue that's sparking quite a lot of interest and discussion, and yeah, as Nicola said, we were surprised that there weren't more firm kind of guidance out there. So we're really happy to be able to take this discussion forward. And I really look forward to seeing how this play out across the region and beyond as well. And I hope to see all of you. I know in some of the other side events and conference events over the next few weeks. There's a lot of things happening, and I think it's really important that we get a chance to discuss these really key issues to make sure that we all supporting countries and individuals to get in the picture. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And please, if you have any specific questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. Thank you so much and have a nice day. Thank you. Bye.